Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Byte podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guest, Jeff Caudill, Vice President of Risk Management at the Haskell Company. Our episode is focused on maximizing the return on a single-parent captive. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Byte at www.buildwithproactive.com. Welcome to the Building Byte podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you can hear from the experts about key topics to help you be successful. I'm Mike Diercksen, Manager of Marketing and Business Development, and our guest today is Jeff Caudill, Vice President of Risk Management at the Haskell Company. Jeff, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Michael. How are you?
Doing great. Really excited to have you on the show, kind of talk through some of these topics you've got here and get things rolling. Yeah. So, Jeff, before we get right into it, though, it's a real pleasure connecting to you. I wonder if you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are today in your career.
Sure. So I'm a career insurance professional. I've been, in a lot of different roles throughout, 30 plus years in the business, from really the underwriting side to the sales side with brokers to really about 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, I was able to land a position in a risk management role with a Toyota group company and spend a decade with them, kind of busting my chops on, as you can imagine, a pretty robust, insurance program for their Toyota group. And then really 10 years ago or so, I moved to Denver and landed a position with CH2M Hill at the time. So I got into the construction side of things. And so for just over a decade now, I've been in construction risk management and now with Haskell. So
Right. And I'm sure quite the change from Toyota to construction as well, but very interesting stuff there. So with that being said, Jeff, diving into our main topic today, maximizing the return on a single parent captive. When we last spoke, you mentioned you've been in the industry for 20, 30 years, seen a lot of changes. And through all that experience, what do you think has enticed you and Haskell to create your own single parent captive?
Well, really, when I came to Haskell 3+ years ago, we had been since 2006 in a group captive for many years, and a very successful group captive. So we busted our chops kind of for 15+ years in that group captive. And then shortly after I got here, my boss, Brad Slappy, who's the CFO here, came to me and said, what do you think about the opportunity to create our own single parent captive? And that just made a whole lot of perfect sense, right? Because of the size that we were at this point. We had grown quite a bit in the 15 years since we really joined the group captive. And so we decided that it made sense to pursue, and then we did. We kind of began the process to do that. And it made, wasn't a surprise when the feasibility study said, yep, you're a perfect candidate for that. So we just dove in.
Yeah. And I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that, Jeff. You mentioned the feasibility study and kind of those steps. And I'm sure for our audience listening, they're going, what does that look like, right? What are the hurdles that you face? Like, how do you even begin that process? So could you help them understand a little bit about the decision-making process that you went through of how to do this successfully?
Yeah, sure. So really the number one thing you need to do is determine if we do this, is this something that actuarially, is it sound, right? Does it make sense? And so you start with a feasibility study and you really, I guess the first thing you do is you decide which lines you're interested in, moving into a captive. Once you've determined that, and it was really no big mystery to us because we just took our basic main casualty lines, right? General liability, work comp, and auto, which I think is sort of the bread and butter of a single parent captive when you're thinking about it. Can do a lot of different things, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we get through this. But yeah, so you want to get with a good group of folks, find a good consultant, begin your feasibility study and attack the lines that you're interested in putting in there to determine, first off, does it make sense to do this, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure at an executive level, there's got to be a desire to streamline those risk solutions, maximize cash flow, kind of control your own destiny, so to speak. And that may be different for everyone, but would you say that kind of helped drive the decision making at Haskell?
Yeah, no doubt that one of the main benefits of having a single parent captive is, well, there's several main benefits, but, cash flow is one of them, right? Instead of handing your money to a third party insurance carrier, you're handing it to a subsidiary of your parent, right? So you're keeping that money in house. And if you've got good safety and good controls throughout and good loss management, you're basically handing yourself, some profits, because if you have premium that's X, and of course, if you have losses that you pay out of your captive that are Y and they're less than X, then hey, guess who keeps that money? You get to keep that money, and not the third party insurance carrier, right? So,
right. I'm sure, again, like you said, everyone's got their different key factors that's going to drive that decision making process, but certainly it's easy to see how that could be a big one for people.
Yeah, I mean, when you go through the feasibility study, I mean, one of the things you're going to look at is your loss history, right? So if you're looking at loss history that suggests you're not as good as the average bear, probably your feasibility is going to be, not such a good decision for you to go do this. Don't take this risk yourself. But, if you're a well-run company with good loss control, it can make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so to that point, Jeff, you've mentioned the feasibility study a couple times here. Is that something that you do internally, or is that something that a consultant would help you perform kind of as that self-audit?
That is totally something that is done by a consultant, right? So they'll come in and they'll do just that. They'll gather your history over the many years, mainly your loss history, and determine, what makes sense for you. And it's not a difficult process, but it can be, a lot of information is needed and the more you can give them, the better. So when we were looking at it, I mean, they were asking me for 10 to 15 years worth of data. Right. It's not something you want to look at. Oh, we've been great for the last 3 years. No, we really want to look at what have the last 2 decades look like. I mean, if you have that data, the more you can give them, the better the study and the results.
Yeah. Exactly. It's one of those tricks. We've talked with several people in the technology space, with the construction industry, and data's great, but how do you use it, right? So you need to have that data, but you have to be able to apply it in the right way and hopefully make an educated decision like that.
Absolutely.
So then, Jeff, next question would be, you've been in the industry for 20, 30 years at this point. You've seen the market grow, you've seen something like that, and that helped you kind of come to the conclusion, hey, at Haskell, we want to go to that single parent captive. What do you think are some of the benefits or the things that being in that single parent captive have enabled you to do? And given your experience, why was that so desirable for you in this scenario?
Sure. So I mentioned, flexibility from a cash flow standpoint, but one of the other things is, and this is kind of hard to put wrap your brain around, because I think most people in the industry are very comfortable with the fact we've been in a prolonged soft market really for most of my career, with the exception of a few times, right? We had the terrorist attacks in 9/11, and so the property market went sideways. And then recently we've had some cyber security that's gone sideways. Casualty had its moments too. And having a single parent captive can help you eliminate that, right? If you've got your general liability in a single parent captive and the market is going squirrely as far as either capacity or pricing, you don't have that volatility, right? So that's really kind of one of the main benefits, besides the cash flow, is to give you stability and credibility when it comes to, I know what my coverages are going to be. I know what my costs are going to be. I don't have to sweat the market so much.
Right. It kind of circles back to that controlling your own destiny, right?
Yes,
so you're kind of even keel, and you're not getting too high, too low with the market. You can, as long as you're taking care of yourself internally, you're able to kind of ride right through that.
Sure, right. You gotta have good risk management practices, right? You gotta have good safety, good quality, especially in the construction space. It's mandatory in the construction space. But having all that, having a single parent captive then gives you the freedom and flexibility from a market standpoint and cash flow standpoint. So
certainly. And so, Jeff, you mentioned a few of those curveballs that have been thrown by the industry for the last several years. Recently comes to mind is COVID, some extreme supply chain shortages. And I'm kind of wondering, right? So again, 30 years of experience, what might be that prediction? What are you kind of keeping an eye on? Where do you think we're trending? What do you think might be the next thing, either good or bad for the industry?
Well, a couple of things. I do think that, we are looking at a hard market in the future. And as I look at, interest rates rising today and the market kind of going, maybe not necessarily tanking, but it's not as robust as, say, it's been in the last decade. So, insurance companies live and die by the market, right? If they're not getting returns out of the market, then they have to have underwriting results. And if they have to have underwriting results, that generally means pricing is going to go up. So there's your market changing.
Right.
COVID, I've seen some real changes with the COVID, particularly in the builder's risk space. Our builder's risk, the coverages there have gotten more expensive. Certainly the we do not have that in our single parent captive today, and it might be a great candidate to get in there just because I am seeing some changes in the market. And when you talk about COVID interacting with the construction space, we had big supply chain issues, right? So we've got a number of different things that now are, the lead might be a year and a half out, where we in the past might have been able to get that in a 2 or 3 month time frame. So when it comes to builder's risk, your builder's risk doesn't begin until the construction begins. But now I've got projects coming to me saying, hey, I got to secure this. I don't have anywhere to put it. We're not building the building yet, but I'm going to have to go get some switch gear that I'm going to need, a year from now, and I have to go get it today. Is that covered? And I'm like, well, typically it would be covered under my builder's risk, but because I don't have my builder's risk in place yet, what do you do, right? What are you going to do with it? So there's always some curveballs that are coming at you in the risk management space. So that's what makes it interesting as well.
Agreed. And we had Lockton on the podcast last season, and they had a great answer to that. They kind of created a program where they had a temporary storage, and they would be able to keep the prices level, because they said, well, we can hold on to the materials until the project begins, and that was helping to stabilize the market there. So always some new and innovative things to do, and it's I've never ceased to amaze me the solutions that people can create, right, when faced with a task like that.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, this has been an excellent discussion. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on with us. One of the things we like to do for our audience is to leave them with some takeaways, right? So if you were an audience member, say, again, that might be a contractor, a carrier, a broker, any of our various stakeholders here. If I was looking for 3 takeaways from this conversation, what do you think those 3 takeaways should be?
Well, when it comes to, let's just put it in terms of, a captive and identifying whether or not you want to establish a captive. One of the takeaways I would say is just be patient, right? The process doesn't have to be, it won't be done in 30-day time frame. It's probably a 6-month time frame. So be patient, do your homework, understand who you're working with, get comfortable with who you're working with, and then also educate yourself, right? Educate yourself as to what are the benefits and what are the pros and cons. It's not all pros; there are cons, right? There are every decision has a reaction, right? So understand yourself and educate yourself, I should say, and understand what it is you want to accomplish. And then last but not least would be to just do it, right? I think a lot of people are afraid to even take that first step. It's really not that big a deal. Just go ahead and do it. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Excellent. What about an action item, right? So you mentioned just do it. Like, that's that first step. If our listeners are looking and they're kind of going, this makes sense, Jeff, you seem like a smart guy, where do I even start? What do I do? What's that first step look like? What do you think that first step should be?
I think the first step would be to you find a good consultant to work with, but really the first step might be understand where do you want to domicile your captive, and then once you've decided where you want to domicile your captive, you might begin to find the consultants in that state, right, where you're going to actually domicile your captive. Find a good consultant to work with who is in that state, so they can advise you directly about the regulatory environment that you're about to jump into. So, and then also, the consultants we had, they were they were not only helpful in the feasibility study, they actually became our ongoing actuaries after the fact. They helped us identify our captive manager, right, which you're going to need one of those as well. They also helped us identify a legal team to work with. So a good consultant can help you through this process in a great way.
Yeah, no, so true. And it's a through line we see quite often on the podcast, right? It can feel like it's a numbers business, or it's at times it's kind of always evolving, but really it all comes back to relationships and finding people that you like working with, that seem to understand you and that you have a good partnership with. So it seems like that's the same thing with the captives as well.
Absolutely. I mean, insurance itself, right? And particularly a captive, developing a captive, it is a relationship business. So that's first and foremost.
Agreed. So Jeff, before we let you go, we like to always ask a few rapid fire questions. So first and foremost, where do you think people struggle the most with captives, right? Where do you see people just not understanding or missing the mark with captives?
I think they might think too much. I mean, about what the benefits are as far as a captive. They might have this. They're not the answer to everything. They're a vehicle that help you establish a place to put some risk, but they're also something that needs to be managed and I wouldn't consider it the end all be all, right? So don't have too high an expectation. It's a great tool, but it's also not, it's not sliced bread.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Another one would be if you could share a professional tip you've learned along your career, right? 30 years in the space. What do you think would be one of the best tips you got to where you are now?
Well, I think the number one answer there would be to expect change, right? And one thing is for certain, over the last 20 or 30 years, even though it's the construction industry and even though it's insurance, there's been a lot of change, right? There's a lot of technology that's been introduced, and certainly you're going to see technology leading the way into the future. Chat, GDP's coming, all of that, I think is going to be a big part of the future of not only insurance, not captive insurance, but also, life in general. So expect change. And maybe follow up would be to embrace change also.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife's an educator, and she's talked a lot about children coming in and ChatGPT is writing papers for them, and the conversation on should we try to tell them not to do that, or should we try to coach them how to do it better, right? And thinking about that. So definitely a good bit of advice there to embrace the change. And so lastly, Jeff, you may have noticed this is the Building Byte podcast. That stands for Building Insurance Technologies with the Experts. You are today's expert. So I know you're in Jacksonville, Florida. Where are you taking a bite out of today?
Well, one of my favorite places just around the corner is called Carolina Jack's, and it is a gourmet burger place, and it's the best greasy burger in town. So if you're ever in Riverside and you're in Jacksonville, Carolina Jack's.
What's the burger? I gotta ask. Like, what are you like? Are you like the burger so high you can't even get your mouth around it? Or do you like a simple burger?
I like a simple burger, but I do like a few added flavors. A little blue cheese, maybe an onion ring on there. Just spice it up.
Sounds good to me. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Really appreciate it. If our listeners want to hook up with you, where can they find you?
LinkedIn I am on LinkedIn, so if anybody wants to connect with me there, that'd be great. You can use my email, which is just my name, jeffrey.caudill@Haskell. Feel free to drop me a line via email if you'd like, and those are probably the two best places.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Jeff. We really appreciate having you on the show, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for listening to The Building Byte. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbyte.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Byte news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbyte.com.